Chapter 1. Dario Cox received a strange and simple message. It read, "Urgently see Paul at 45 Elizabeth Street, Sydney." There was no signature of any kind, but the paper and envelope held significance for Dario. They were orders he could not ignore. With a mutter in Portuguese, as only a Brazilian would know how to do, he prepared his gear and left his comfortable apartment on the 102nd floor of the Mercury building. He took an autogyro from the First Avenue Air Station, which took him within minutes to the Araguaia Interstellar Experimentation Field. It was not necessary for Dario Cox to show his ID badge. He was well known to the external guards. He entered the metallic aerodynamic building and navigated through various departments, ignoring the respectful greetings from the employees. Finally, he stopped before the desk or suspended table of a beautiful young woman with slanted eyes and silver hair. Dario knocked on the table hard, and she looked up, surprised. Her surprise turned into a smile when she recognized him. "Oh, Mr. Cox. I want to see Commander Octavio Bershon right now." The secretary blinked rapidly with her fluttering artificial eyelashes and ended up stammering with something unintelligible. Dario Cox was the ideal type for a young woman of the 24th century. Tall, strong, energetic, and with a history of adventures in remote and mysterious worlds that could fill all the pages of a phonovisor guide. "You may go ahead, Mr. Cox," she finally dared to say. Her slanted eyes followed the space explorer until he disappeared behind a door that, with its private sign, seemed to mean nothing more than a free pass for Dario. "What's up, kid?" exclaimed the little man who, sitting behind a table, was reading a sheet of metallic paper. He then stood up, extended his hand to Dario, and with a gesture indicated a bottle of gin at one end of the table. "No thanks, Bershon," Dario said. He added, "I've got something to do again. These things where surveillance patrols can't interfere, you know. I don't like them." The tiny man smiled and asked, "Where are you heading now?" "I'm not entirely sure. For now, I'll take a trip around Australia to see a guy they first don't know. But on these trips, I'll leave my hide for a day." "If that happens, Cox, don't worry about anything else," Bershon quickly added. "All the inhabitants of this globe will pay you the proper honors." "Yeah, right. And me, so peaceful in my grave. Order them to set up a reactor for me on the runway, and I'm off. And you can keep greasying your hair. Maybe you'll end up liking that girl." Dario gestured toward the door that connected to the anteroom, "and you can ditch your wife." The little man laughed while pressing the button on his phonovisor. Then he ordered, after a voice took his orders. "Set up the Delta -5 on runway number 2 for Captain Dario Cox. It's urgent." "Yes, Commander. It will be ready in 3 minutes." "Thanks, Octavio," Cox said, getting ready to leave. "Wait, kid," the little man interrupted him. "Good luck. Don't you know what it's about?" "No, I don't. But I imagine it won't be about wooing a pretty Venusian." You keep watching as the television presents the spine-chilling adventures of Dario Cox, Tyrrell, and O'Brien, 3 crazy guys who, in the service of humanity, traverse remote worlds where frickin' soda hasn't arrived yet, nor Yasma's Russian ballet. And don't worry about my death. It will come one day without sorrow or glory, in the stupidest way possible. And people will say, "Poor thing, as brave as he was." When Dario Cox slammed the door shut, Octavio Bershon's laugh still echoed. But Dario paid it no mind, as he kept repeating himself, alluding to his new mission. No, it won't be to woo a pretty woman. And he had no idea how wrong he was. The electromagnetic ramp that extended to the landing strips led him within minutes to the hangar, where a group of men were preparing an atomic-powered rocket car for him. Dario approached the shiny device. The mechanics greeted him, and an assistant handed him a package with his space clothes and helmet. He quickly donned them, zipped up, and then connected the tubes to the small oxygen bottles. He nodded in acknowledgement and climbed into the cockpit of the device. Not for a moment did it occur to him to look behind, as he was focused on the launch ramp and the signals from the ground crew. Almost as he connected the radio screen, he received a message from the flight control. Ready, Captain Cox. Damn Perk, don't you know I'm not a captain? In this dirty America, everyone calls me captain. I'm not a captain. Did you hear me, Perk? I'm an idiot, that's what I am, Dario replied, grumpy. Well, the officer responded, smiling at the gray screen of the phonovisor. Don't get angry, Cox. Ready for takeoff? Yes, ready, Dario Cox responded, taking hold of the controls. At the same instant, on the runway, the ground crew waved their flags. Dario turned the throttle of the turbo reactor. A dull boom sounded behind him, muffled by the device's double hull, and immediately he felt the ground slipping beneath him. In a tenth of a second, the runway disappeared, and he found himself navigating above a milky sea of clouds. Then he engaged the autopilot, lifted his helmet, and went to light a cigarette. At that precise moment, he felt or sensed something he couldn't identify. But it seemed like someone was behind him. He froze, and his right hand slid down the leg as if searching for something to light. But something stopped him, leaving his hand on the gun's grip. First, he smelled a penetrating perfume. Then, beside his face, a white hand appeared, holding a luxurious electric lighter. Light up, Mr. Cox, said a soft female voice. Dario glanced sideways at the smooth white skin and shivered. The ignition plate of the lighter approached the tip of Dario's cigarette, which he inhaled, savoring the aromatic smoke, and slowly turned his face, following the curves of the beautifully sculpted bare and perfect arm. Finally, he saw the woman. Dario Cox was hard to impress, to say the least. But the woman he saw behind his seat left him speechless. Leaning against the seatback was the most wonderful, harmonious, perfect, sculptural woman imaginable, the most to describe a beautiful woman. Dario, however, maintained his composure. Thank you, miss. Are you going far? He asked in the casual manner a taxi driver might ask a client. Ah, sorry, I forgot to introduce myself, she exclaimed. My name is Karen Vasiev. I also have the pleasure of introducing you to the eminent Professor Schwartz from the University of Berlin. The young space explorer began to get irritated. He should be alone, on the Delta-5. He sat up slightly in the seat and turned around. On one side of the young woman's magnificent torso, he saw a man of average height, with a dark complexion and a friendly appearance, openly smiling. He appeared to be about 50 years old, and was dressed in the common style of the time, a short fitted jacket, colonial-style light-colored shorts, and artificial rubber boots. But the most curious thing about that friendly man was a strange object he held in his hand, which could have been either a sextant or a Geiger counter, or a brand-new model automatic pistol. How's it going, Mr. Cox? The man smiled. I'm very sorry if my company isn't pleasant for you. I must warn you, I'm not here by choice either. No way, gentlemen. Isn't there anyone else in there? It almost seems like you've got the wrong device, Dario tried to smile. Are you on a honeymoon trip? The sculptural beauty stepped back a bit, and Dario could admire once again the harmonious set of her figure and the subtlety of her clothes, very tight from the waist up. A short ruffled skirt left her lovely legs in the air like an old ballerina, which were half covered in beautiful flexible crystal boots, adorned with strange artistic motifs, indicating she was single, as a married woman would wear black boots. From the harmony of her mouth and face, Dario was smitten. And he thought it would be worthless if he didn't end the trip with a kiss from such a strawberry mouth. But who were those two foreigners? A Russian woman and a German? Could they be international spies? How could they have gotten inside the Delta-5? He only found an answer to this last question: Octavio Bershin or some ground officer from the Araguay field. But that would lead to a military trial. Well, you'll tell me how I can help you. Oh, Mr. Cox, the German spoke, slowly pronouncing Esperanto words, the official language of the time. Ours is a sad and long story. Well, with that company, I don't see any sadness whatsoever, Dario responded, indicating Karen Vasiev. She smiled, appreciating the compliment, and said, You're very kind, Mr. Cox. Professor Schwartz feared you would react otherwise, and that's why he gives you the Thomason, a simple yet very useful device. Dario looked again at the simple device and wondered where its simplicity lay. Although the professor will keep his Thomason, we hope you will behave with proper decorum. This way, before we reach Sydney, if we do, you will know as much as we do about our presence on your plane. Ah, very well, that's what I call reasoning with someone. Then, Karen, the German interjected, allow me to explain to this gentleman what we want from him. Franz Schwartz put away his curious device and said, Don't think I have much to say to you, Mr. Cox. We are on this device thanks to the kindness of Commander Octavio Bershon. That fat pig! Dario exploded. No, for God's sake, don't talk about him like that. He has only been following orders from his honorable superiors. Well, I don't understand why this is such a mystery. Dario stammered. I don't know how things are done in your countries, but here, when we want to introduce several people, we confront them and... We couldn't do it that way, Mr. Cox, intervened Karen Vassiliev. To work anonymously, certain precautions must be taken. And don't think it wasn't necessary in this case. We know Paul has been killed. Dario slowly turned to the young woman and removed the cigarette from his lips. His usual energetic expression now became as immobile as tungsten and as rigid as basalt. Paul. Who is he? He asked quietly. A secret agent of the Australian Federation. The German took a few steps forward and added, In the entire solar system, there is only one man who can handle this matter. That man is you. Excuse me, understand. The other day, a secret meeting was held in the United Nations Private Council where a serious problem was raised, related to something Paul was preparing for the UN. But last night, I received orders from my superiors in Germany to move to Brasilia. Upon my arrival in that capital, I was introduced to Miss Karen Vassiliev, who knows as much as I do. However, the orders came from way above, since Commander Octavio Bershon had also received his, so we had to secretly get into the device in which you were supposed to depart. I don't believe it, exclaimed Cox. I don't know how the secret services of your respective countries work, but what I can tell you is that we do things very differently. Do you understand me? In a very different way. And what if I told you, Mr. Cox, the beautiful woman interjected, that any moment we could be joining Paul in eternity? Miss, I've already made it clear I don't know that Paul you're talking about, Dario responded coldly. And I don't believe much of what you've told me so far, by the way, very little. Well, don't get angry. And from the little I can tell you, deduced from my boss's reports, is that we have to work together, whether you like it or not. Do you understand, renowned and popular Dario Cox? Ended the somewhat furious Russian woman. And what I, in turn, can tell you, as my duty compels me to do, is to hand you over to the international police as soon as we arrive in Sydney. Oh, Mr. Cox, laughed the woman. That's terrible. Are you going to take us to an underwater prison at the bottom of the Atlantic? Dario turned in his seat and did not reply. He disconnected the autopilot and maneuvered to descend the device. He calculated he was flying over the Pacific Ocean. He felt the woman and the German whispering something in the narrow aisle. Through the magnetic needle glass, he saw their figures. The German listened attentively to the Russian, who was gesturing and moving her bare arms energetically. Dario turned and shouted in an unsteady tone. Can you tell me what new scheme you're plotting? The woman approached him and explained. We're talking about you, Mr. Cox, and by the way, very badly. You must know that 200 years ago, our countries stopped being enemies. All the peoples of Earth now live for the common good, governed by the same international laws. I believe our ancestors did a great thing by resolving racial, religious, political, and governmental differences. But if people in America are like you, we won't be long before we return to the quarrels of the 20th century. Why are you telling me that, Miss Vassiliev? Cox interrupted her. It seems you don't know me well. I'm telling you so you understand that we don't fight among ourselves, but against external enemies, dangerous for all of humanity, she shouted, enraged. And I'm telling you that women are better off at home, mending clothes, than sneaking into people's planes. Karen Vasiev blushed and bit her lips. But the German professor interjected, in a bad mood. Leave him alone, Karen, he's stubborn. They'll open his eyes soon enough. But at that very moment, a loud whistle escaped from a speaker installed on the control panel, and shortly after, a voice speaking a strange language reached the ears of the 3 occupants of the Delta-5. Dario tensed as he recognized that language. He looked wide-eyed at the Russian and the German, wondering if either of them knew that language. But he saw no indication in them. Dario, head to Mauna Loa, Hawaii, without losing a minute. Do you hear me, Dario? Dario Cox perfectly knew the voice of his partner Basil Tyrrell, speaking the language of the Northern Venusians, where both he and O'Brien were stationed for 2 years at the military consulate of the interplanetary colonies. He knew the syncopated and arrhythmic syllables very well, but he doubted the 2 stowaways knew them too. First, because the German didn't look like someone who had even been to the moon, and second, because women were forbidden from staying on Venus. What's that? Asked Karen Vasiev. I don't know. We might have picked up some Hertzian wave. We're passing through a large mass of clouds over the Pacific. But again, the German drew his strange Geiger counter, and his face twisted into a scowl of displeasure. He looked at his companion, and then fixedly through the unbreakable glass of the cockpit. But outside, barely anything could be seen. Swirls of fog obscured the view and moistened the glass panels. Dario Cox. Can you hear me? Why aren't you responding? Don't you remember your dear Basil, with the good times we've had together? The modulations of the Venusian language came intermittently, mixed with parasitic atmospheric disruptions. We're in Mauna Loa, and we're about to embark on a job that will make noise, my friend Dario. And then, with anxiety in his voice, in Esperanto, Basil Tyrrell's voice added, What's wrong, Dario? Why aren't you responding? I know your contact is open. They're calling you, Cox, said Karen Vasiev. Yes, I've heard it. Then, raising his voice, he added, I'm fine, Bob, don't worry. I've understood you. I can't say more. But at that precise moment, something unusual and unexpected happened. It seemed as if the Delta-5 was shaken by an earthquake. It was a quick shake, but so violent that it made the woman wobble, the only one without support, as the professor was leaning against the doorframe. Immediately after, a tremendous explosion was heard. In the blink of an eye, Dario realized something abnormal was happening. And since in case of a malfunction it was better to have high altitude, he quickly pulled the elevation lever and opened the reserve gas, injecting fluorine under pressure into the atomic reactor. Inside the gyroscopic cockpit, the exorbitant speed was instantly noticeable, as the Delta-5 shot upwards through the clouds like a cosmic projectile. And when they emerged into the radiant blue ocean of the sky, above the cotton-like bed of clouds, as if perched on them, they saw a huge bluish pencil heading silently toward the Delta-5. Dario also saw a fiery beam of light streak through the void and heard the roar of a formidable explosion that occurred just below his device. The Delta-5 was shaken like a feather, and the 2 stowaways, who weren't strapped to the flight chair like Dario, rolled clumsily across the floor. But Dario maneuvered quickly, with admirable composure, to evade the fateful beam of light. Were they being shot with a cosmic ray or with simple atomic grenades? He wasn't sure, although it was very certain that whoever their attacker was, they didn't intend to take them prisoner, but simply to kill them.